Well, Joseph, thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. I'm excited.
Me too. I love
I'm
talking to
fired up.
people who you're on fire. Yay. I love talking to people who are like super entrepreneurial and sober. So you're like my perfect guest.
Well, once I start talking, you'll realize I'm not perfect.
Listen, nobody is, but that's what makes us relatable, right?
That's right. That's facts.
Yeah, yeah. I like to start out the interviews with something called the lightning round, which is not
Okay.
fast, but we'll front load the episode with some resources. When you first got sober, what was the book that helped you? Was there a book that helped you in the beginning?
I mean, honestly, the big book was the biggest thing that helped me. Um,
Yeah.
that I related to. I did read a lot of books on dealing with people more because I always thought my problem was I didn't know how to deal with people. But the reality was I didn't love myself, and that's why I didn't want to deal with people.
Yeah.
So I would read like John Maxwell Winning with People, and I thought all that stuff was great. So when I combined that with like the big book and understanding my alcoholism, my addiction, it was like then I started to realize, my problem is not how to talk to people. It's just I'm not comfortable in my own skin. That's why I can't talk to them.
Dude, that's deep. That is so
Hmm.
true.
Yeah, so it's like two of them.
Yeah, I'm curious. So Big Book is really Alcoholics Anonymous. And
Yeah,
it was written in 1939, I believe. I might get in trouble for that. I believe
I
it was
think you're right.
1935. I think it was started in 35. And anyway, between 35 and 39.
Hmm.
And it's kind of got this old-timey language that a lot of people are resistant to or kind of struggle with. Was that your experience at all?
A little bit. So I had a great sponsor, and it's actually something like I do with my guys now. He puts me to like the simple parts of the book, and then we read it together. So like
Mhm.
there is parts in the book that like if you just open it and start reading it, you're like, what that like it seems confusing, and you're like, what is this doctor talking about? And this he uses these big words. I dropped out in ninth grade, like I can't even pronounce half of these words. But what my sponsor did great with me was we would meet together. And
Oh,
like he
nice.
opened up the first part of how it works, and it was really explaining our alcoholism and our addiction, and it was like breaking it down to how our mind works with a disease. So he took me to the simple parts for me
Mm,
to understand it. Like till
mhm.
this day I don't even know if I've read the whole book itself. Like I've always looked at parts of the book and chapters of the book that when I was dealing with something, my sponsor would go to the book and he would open it and he would read it. And when he read it, I was like, what the heck did you just read? And then we would explain it to me. And that's how it
Okay.
made it simpler. So that would be my suggestion for people. But there's also some tapes I listened to. I don't know if you ever heard of Joe and Charlie, but
Joe and Charlotte, yeah.
they were a big thing because I would read and not know. And then I would listen to Joe and Charlie and they break some of the stuff down. And then I'd
Yeah.
go to big book studies. So there was these little things I was
Okay.
doing to make the book seem a lot easier because I was amazed at how much I related to it.
I know, right? Isn't that crazy? I think that speaks to the idea that um people are different, but feelings are all the same.
That's right. Yeah, our
Yeah.
situations and our circumstances, everybody's got different experiences, but we all have the same emotional struggles. It's just our experience brought out different emotions. So I might have fear, but my fear came from my addiction and going back to prison, and your fear may come from, not being successful enough or not being a good enough mother, for example. But the
Oh, why
emotion
you gotta say
is the
not
same.
successful?
Well, I mean, that's a fear
Like
of
you're reading my mind.
because if you're like me, I have the exact same fear.
I am. Yeah. It's so funny. Like I was saying, the entrepreneurial gene is like this drive for success.
That's
And
right.
yeah, for me, it's, it lends to like workaholism and,
Hmm.
seeking external validation and stuff. And recovery for me has been about trying to turn that around. Have you found that to be true? Like instead of seeking outside, it's about turning within.
Oh man, like I just thought you were reading my mind because that is exactly, one thing I learned was, validation from other people was something I really sought out, especially helping people in recovery. Like I was seeking to get validated that I was a good leader by if these guys stayed sober or not, or
Ooh,
if
that's a tough one.
right. And that led me to not sponsoring guys for a whole year because I was sponsoring 3 guys and we were all hanging out together, going to lunch, going to meetings together. 2 of them ended up overdosing and dying.
Oh, I'm
Now,
so sorry.
and unfortunately, that's what happens in this disease. It shouldn't
I
happen.
know.
It
I
shouldn't happen.
know. It
But
does though.
when you're doing something, you know, and what I was doing at that time was I needed their sobriety to stay sober. I had a motive. It was my motive that was, I'm sponsoring you guys because if you stay sober, I'll feel better about
Mm,
my leadership and what I'm doing for people,
mhm,
that when they overdosed and died, I felt like I took the blame. You know, so I
mm,
started to say, I don't want to sponsor guys because it's too much pressure. You know, a lot of, if these guys don't make it, then I'm not, it's telling me I'm not good enough. Well, today,
right.
only reason I sponsor guy, I just give them what was freely given to me and I leave the rest up to God. That's not on me. I can't put my pressure on them. You know, so I
Right.
did that a lot. I needed validation from other people to make me feel like I was good enough. And the truth is, that's just a lack of spirituality. That's what I know 100%. When I'm doing that, I'm not spiritually fit.
It's so interesting though, because we are taught in the 12-step community to, you got to give it away to keep it, right? Like that's firmly ingrained. And it can get so confusing at times because we do get that. We were joking earlier about the service dope, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like being of service. And when you connect at that heart level and you're able to transmit something to somebody else, and that feeling that you get of feeling connected and
Mm-hmm.
the look of gratitude on someone's face, that is very intoxicating, for lack of a better word, right? And it's
Yeah.
easy to go too far with that, where we start sacrificing ourselves in order to help others. We have to maintain that balance.
Mhm. Yeah. And you
That's
know,
so
the other
good.
thing too is like even in the rooms, like you think about why they say that. Like I always like to break things down. Like, okay, why are we helping people? What is it doing for us and for them? And the reality is it gets us out of ourselves. Like that's what I learned
Mhm.
for me is for me, I help other people because it does get me out of myself and it puts me of service. Well, now I don't have to just do that in the program of recovery. I can do that in my home. I can do that at my job. I can do that in the grocery store that I walk to. So my mindset is not just because I felt like that's what happened to me is I put so much pressure, like you talked about, on when I was helping people that became like I had to have it, which is a good thing, but it could also become where now you have motives and you're putting pressure and you're doing too much. And today, what I just say is I want to be of service to anyone, anywhere that God puts people in front of me. And that if
Yeah.
it's in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, it is. If it's on this podcast that somebody listens to it, it is. Or if it's my employees, like wherever I can be of service, I'm constantly just looking for that. And I feel like that takes the pressure off of each individualistic, you know, area like AA or my marriage or my job, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. I think it's so important to like have that grounding, mentality of letting go of the outcome, like just showing up to do what you can and then letting go of the outcome.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Some things are just not our jobs.
Nope, they're not at all.
No. Um, those are so anyway, those are great book recommendations, a big book and John Maxwell. Was it Winning with People?
Yep.
I
It
think
was
that
how to win with people.
How to Win with People. Yeah, isn't that funny? Like before you get sober, you're like, oh, maybe my problem is people. Maybe my
That's right.
problem is maybe it's love, maybe it's money. Those
Yeah.
are
Well, I would walk into
three.
rooms and I'd see all these people talking and having conversations. And like, if you meet me today, I'll go to anybody and I can have a conversation. It's very easy. But before I was like, man, these people are really good at talking with people. And I was
Yeah.
like, that's what I need to work on is how do I have conversations and talk with people? And John Maxwell is a pastor and I've always listened to him and I've read some of his books when I was in prison. So I looked up and I remember he always has books on communication, you know, and I
Mm,
just, I that was one of the first books that I bought.
yeah, super important
Mhm.
communication is. Um, do you have a go-to mantra or quote that you live by? Something that you find yourself saying a lot?
Yep. If you hide your story, you hide God's glory.
Ooh.
It's actually on my on a T-shirt, and I have a bunch of them that I just printed out because
Did you?
for me, I was always, and I think this happened. This could be for anybody. You know, I was always ashamed of my story. I was always ashamed of, and my story. The amazing thing about my story is it's not just my past; it's what's going on today. Because today is going to become my past in a week or 2 weeks. So I'm always living out my story. So what
Yeah.
that quote does for me is it does two things. It tells me that I can talk about my past because I can show people the glory of God because it's not me. You know,
Mhm.
none of this was me. It's just by the grace of God that I'm sitting here today, you know, talking to you about hope and inspiration when, you know, 6, 7 years ago, I wanted to kill myself and I didn't want to
Yeah.
live.
Yeah.
And then now it also gives me another thing to be vulnerable with people today because I'm living in my story.
Right.
And if I can talk to people about things that I'm struggling with and how I overcome those things, now I can show people and give them the same hope as I'm going through my life. So that quote, it allows me to live to be okay with my past and share it, to give people hope, to let them know that, hey, you're not alone. I've been there, and I've been depressed. I've been suicidal, but there is hope. And then also gives me the ability to be vulnerable with people today as I'm still currently living in my story.
That's beautiful. I love that. Do you have a regular self-care practice that helps you stay sober? Whether it could be like a morning practice or a weekly, however you see it.
Yeah, there's, a lot of times, even when I'm asked that question, there's so many things that like, if I just did one of them, it doesn't work, as crazy as it sounds.
Oh,
So
wow.
there's few multiple things for me that's important. Like my mornings have started, it's always starting with, I open, like right now I'm reading a book. I go to a men's group on Wednesday. It's a Christian group, and we study a book together, and we just read a chapter a week, and we meet Wednesday mornings at a Panera Bread. So usually when I wake up, I get a cup of coffee, which is, my favorite thing in the world. And I open up that book, and then I have some daily readings that I do. But for me, my conversations with God in the morning are very important. My first prayer is, God, just put somebody in my path today that I can help, and allow me to, if it's your will today, allow me to see it and be okay with whatever happens today, good or bad, because those are my problems all the time. Is if something goes wrong, I'm wondering, God, where are you? So those are the prayers that I do, and I do those readings. And it's like, some people think if I just start doing that, okay, it helps my full day. It's a great start to my day.
Mhm.
But also at the end of the day, I'm always reflecting on my day. Because I can be I'm so quick to action. As you probably know, as an entrepreneur, we just go, right?
Yeah.
And I actually hired a coach myself that have taught me that I need to learn to just be in my actions, or be in my thoughts, instead of
Yeah.
just being in my actions. So I'll slow down, I'll pause, and I'll think about the feelings that I had that day. Did I have some anxiety? Did I have some fears? Did I find myself quick to get angry today? And then when I think about those moments, I think, did I hurt anybody in those times? Do I need to make amends to somebody? This is a very hard thing for me to do. I wish I did this every night. If I did, it'd be great. But these are things I'm practicing today, because it's like I get so quick for 2 weeks, I'll put my anxieties on my wife, and now I'll make my wife feel like she's not a good enough wife, and not even know that I did that to her,
Yeah.
because I wasn't aware of my emotions. So
And
those are a
it's
few things that help me throughout the day for self-care.
Yeah, no, I love that. It almost sounds like in the 12 steps, they call that like a 10 step, like a daily review,
That's right. Yeah.
both positive and negative, right? Or
Yeah.
challenges. I don't like to think of them as negative, because even the challenging things, we learn something from that.
Yeah,
Like
that's
you,
right.
like you learned about like your self-awareness practice, even if you didn't catch it in the day, and I love that you said it, like sometimes it'll go a couple weeks, because that's how we are.
Yeah.
Nobody's perfect every day. We don't none of these things we do every day. I mean, some people are really good. There's always that exception. I think most of us sort of ebb and flow with our practices.
Yeah, and I think what happens, especially, I still do this. I've done a better job at getting back on the horse, as they say. But I think what
Yeah.
happens is we get so, we stop doing it, and then we stop doing it, and then we're like, oh man, it's almost like a guilt that we're like, I gotta get back up and do it. And the reality is, because we're beaten, I do this. I shouldn't say we, but I'll beat myself up like, man, I haven't really done like this mental inventory or emotional inventory at night for so long. And then I'm like, I haven't done it for so long. It's fine. Instead of, hey, let me get back on it. And me, I'm hard headed. So what happens when I stop is something happens in my life that makes me have to do it.
Yeah.
Either something happens with my wife or at work, and I start to feel those feelings that I don't like, that I associate with the same feelings I felt when I was on drugs.
Right. Yeah.
Irritable, discontent, not
Mm.
feeling at peace with my life, waking up, not even wanting to pray, just feeling disconnected. And when I start to have those feelings, eventually I know I got to do something to change.
Yeah. Pain is a touchstone of all growth, right?
Oh, that's so true.
I feel like that's recovery resistance. Like we know what we need to do, but we just don't do it. Sometimes
Hmm.
it's hard to like get that momentum back.
Yeah.
And pain is a really great motivator, but
Oh man. Pain is one of my motivators, unfortunately, but
everybody's like that, I think.
yeah, it's tough because I always say this, in the program, it's like we do things that are working, and then for us we just stop, and then we wonder why like, why did we stop? It was working. Why'd you stop? And I'm like, I wish I knew. I don't know why. I got
Okay,
lazy, I guess.
let me just tell you this one thing, because I've been around the block. So there's the default mode network, your brain's operating system, right? Your brain is hardwired when you're young. You develop these beliefs and subconscious, beliefs about yourself and the world, your map of the world. And so we get sober and we start doing all these practices, right? And we feel better, but it's like going to the gym. You wouldn't go to the gym once and stay and expect to stay in shape forever, right? But we all stop going to the gym at times, right? And
Yeah.
then we get uncomfortable, whatever, and then we go back to our default.
Yeah.
And so it's just, if we think about it in different terms, like, oh, it's okay, like everybody does, this is part of the human condition. It's our default, and all the practices we do, meditation, journaling, all, connecting with others, meetings or whatever, that's like going to the gym. You kind of move away from that default.
Yeah.
Does
That's a
that
good
make
way.
sense?
No, that's
Yeah.
great. I love that. I'm going to use
Yeah.
it.
Use it.
That's really
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. Because then when you think of it like, oh, I wouldn't eat a salad, one salad, and think that that's it. It's like you got to eat the salad every day.
That's right. Yeah.
I really like salad. Do you like salad? I don't like salad.
I mean, I like a
Anyway,
little bit of salad, but not
a
a lot.
little bit of salad. Yeah, moderation. The only thing I
Moderation.
do, the only thing I do
The
in
only thing, right?
moderation is self-care.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
So funny. Okay, that was really good though. You know what I wanted to ask you is, when you're talking about daily readings, do you do like the daily readers?
So I've just gotten a new a reading. It's called Jesus Calling by
Oh
Sarah
my God,
Young.
I almost said that. It's on my shelf.
Yeah, my wife has one, and she's
Don't you
got a
love
new
it?
one. I forgot the name that it was called, but it's a new one that I just bought too. I haven't opened it yet because it just came in from Amazon.
Oh,
But
nice.
so like my daily one normally is the book that I'm reading with the group, because
Oh,
we got
what
to
book
read
are
it.
you reading right now?
So it's called Holiness by Our Grace. It's a Christian book,
Okay.
and it really just talks about, and if I'll botch who the author is because I'm terrible at that, but it really just talks about how, like, as Christians we think we can work our way to like God's favor, and there's nothing we can do. We fall short every time. So we think
Yep.
like if we're doing good, and we're not, and it's all action, 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 but then we're throwing away what the grace of God is if we think we have to do something. That's why God's grace, I'm a messed up knucklehead on the bus just trying to get to school, and God's like, yeah, you're a knucklehead. I still love you. I'm still going to take care of you.
Yeah, I love that idea. We don't have to earn God's grace. Like, there's nothing that we can do to earn it. It's a given. It's a
That's
gift.
right. It's just
Right.
given. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I grew up with this idea. I think a lot of us do. I grew up in the church, and I kind of grew up with this idea that God's not going to do for you what you can do for yourself. Like, there's a balance there.
Mm-hmm.
Like action is required on my part. But
Yeah.
I get confused. I got confused with that, and it was just like, oh, I need to work hard to earn God's grace. But
Yeah. Yeah. I grew up Catholic. So my dad was in the Catholic Church. There's a lot you have to do, to be closer to God. And nothing. And like I say that, some people think I'm saying something against Catholic. It works for people. But what I was taught for myself, what my dad taught me using the Catholic faith, was you have to do this, you have to do that, you have to do this to get closer to God. So, I'm feeling I have to do all these things, but like it never ends, because I mean, if I go to confession and confess my sins, by the time I leave, I got 3 more. And I'm like, I hope I don't die now, because if I die now, I feel like I'm not going to get to heaven. And it was a never ending cycle. And that's why I
right.
never built a relationship with God, because I always felt like I wasn't good enough.
Yeah, oh my gosh, not good enough is like one of those core original wounds, right? Like that
Mm-hmm.
whole, and then trying to achieve just so that you can feel okay.
Oh, yeah. That's a big part of my story right there.
Yeah, I used to always feel like I had to do twice as much just to feel half as good.
Yeah. Oh, man.
It's
I feel like I
exhausting.
did 3 times as much. It was
You
crazy.
probably did. You're
It
so
was
busy.
crazy.
We're going to talk about all the things that you do. I was asking you earlier. I was like, "Why are you working so hard?" It's like, you're doing so much. We're going to get into it. But
Mhm.
the last question that I have for you, and I probably should have prepped you a little, is I've really been interested in hearing people's like spiritual experience stories. Like, maybe it's a moment of serendipity where something happens where you're just like, wow, how do I explain that other than there was like a higher power working in my life? Do you have any stories that come to mind that speak to that spiritual experience?
Yeah. I have emotional and like real stories, like a car accident story, where my whole vehicle was smashed into pieces except my driver's seat. The ambulance didn't even believe that I was in the vehicle. You know, they were like, there's no way you were in the vehicle. And when I stepped out and I looked at the car, I fainted because I was in shock, but the whole car was smashed into pieces. And the only, like, if you looked in the back seat, it looked like a dinosaur took a bite out of the car. And then
Wow.
when I looked to my right, this door was smashed all the way up to me. My headrest, you can see the cloth in my headrest, but my seat was untouched. And I remember that moment only because that was like one of my first thoughts. There was two things I thought about was that day. Cause I remember just thinking like, there is no way that a human, like this was a God thing here. And I just remember thinking, cause I was still getting high at the time. And I was like, okay, I know God's keeping me alive. I had a girlfriend at the time and she was telling me like, listen, God's got us. I don't know. Like she cried when she saw the vehicle cause it was in shambles, you know, and everybody kept telling me what I kept hearing was God got his hand over your life. But all Joseph thought was like, for what? Because all I was literally doing after I got out of the car before the ambulance got there was I was looking for my wallet because there was pills in the wallet. That was my first thought when I got out of that vehicle. And the ambulance came and they saw me walking around and they said, hey, they were looking for the person in the car because they didn't believe it was me. And I said, I'm just I need to find my wallet because I made up a lie that I have a picture of my grandma in there and I don't want to lose it. And that's all I cared about in that moment was finding my wallet with drugs. So that was one of the times that I just remember thinking, okay, God, you're keeping me alive. There's something here, but I never understood it. And it kind of made me feel depressed because I felt loved by God, but I was like, why? You shouldn't love me. Because number one, the vehicle I was driving, it was my dad's. It was a Cadillac, and I took it without his permission to go visit my girlfriend in Orlando. You know, 2 days before that, I robbed my dad's store and made him think it was his employee. I broke into the store, made him think an employee. Like these are all the things I was doing, and God's keeping me alive. Why? You know, and I never understood why. Today I know why. That it's part of my story, so I can show God's glory. Back to that saying. And the second one that really changed my life to go on a positive note that changed my life was I was sitting in a 10-by-10 cell with 3 months left of my prison sentence. My sobriety date is January 24, 2017. And on the night of January 23rd, 2017, I'm in a 10-by-10 cell. I got 3 months left. I was getting high every day in prison. And I went to a transition home, the ones I was telling you about that I go visit. I'm going to start going to visit now to help these guys. And I got violated. So when you violate the transition home, they send you back to your permanent prison. And I have 3 months left, between 3 and 4 months. And there's a guy inside the 10-by-10 cell. He's been to prison 7 or 8 times. And he looked at me and he just, and I've been to prison twice in Florida. It tells you how many times you've been to prison on your DC number. So when somebody looks at it, they know this is your second, your third, your fourth, you know, and it's by the alphabet. You know, A is your 0 is the first time, A is the second time. So I had an A letter. And he just looked at me and said, you're going to be just like me. And for some reason in that moment, I felt my heart clench because I'm looking at this 60 to 70-year-old man who's got a K letter on his prison band that his life has been inside and outside of prison. And for the first time in my life, I was scared. Like you would think all the other times I was scared. I was not. I've been to prison twice. Not that I wasn't scared, but I was like, I won't come back. Don't worry, I'm not going to come back. And this time I said, I'm scared of coming back now, you know, or I'm scared of dying now because I'm looking at what I think could be me, you know. And in that moment, I got on my knees. And for the first time in my life, I've said prayers before, but they were not real from the heart. And I cried probably more than I've ever cried in my life. And I think it's because it was the first time I was honest with myself, but it was also the first time I was honest with God and just being open. Like, I don't know. You know, I knew in about 10 to 14 days, a guard's going to come to the 10-by-10 cell, let me out and go back on a prison compound where there's more drugs than there is in the streets. And I knew I should say no, like I've always wanted to, but I was afraid I would not. And that was what I was scared of. So I just said an ultimate prayer and asking God to do for me what I couldn't do for myself. And just all I asked was, God, I want to stay sober. I don't want to get high. And he kept me sober for those 4 months. There's a million little situations that I probably could have been in, but I believe God had his hand over me. He still does today. And that was the most spiritual experience I've ever felt because it was the first time that I felt God's presence. Like today, I know what that presence feels like, but in that moment was the first time that I really felt God's presence and his peace. And I felt like the weight was lifted. And I was saying this to a guy at the meeting the other day. And I feel like the reason the weight was lifted was because I look at our problems today and I look at our worries and our fears and our situations like it's like a weighted vest. Like if you ever wore a weighted vest to
Oh
exercise, they're
man.
heavy, right? And you put them on and it's a weighted vest and what does it do? It makes your shoulders slump. That's why when somebody's down, their head is down, their shoulders are slumped. And I envision this weighted vest over them. And that weighted vest could be their worries, their fears, their past. I believe that weighted vest wasn't for us to carry. I believe it's for God to carry it. And I've been carrying this weighted vest with me, since I was 4 years old, being molested from 5 to 7. And I've carried that weighted vest for almost 20 years. And for the first time, I believe I took off that vest in a spiritual moment and just gave it to God and said, take it. And God was like, thank you. I was intended to hold this for you anyways. Now you can walk. And that's when I really felt like I felt light. I felt his presence.
Oh, that's beautiful. I feel like that's a message so many of us need to hear. I think a lot of us take on too much responsibility,
Mm-hmm.
right? We don't trust that there is a higher power that will take it for us.
Yeah. And a lot of times we don't trust because it's not going the way we want it to go, I feel
Yeah.
for me, I should say for me, because sometimes I still put the weighted vest on, and that's the
Yeah.
unfortunate part. Like, why am I putting this vest on when I know? But I believe because there's sometimes I'm trying to make my life happen the way I want it to, and I'm hitting a brick wall and I'm like still moving. And God's like, that's not what I want for you. And I'm trying to take my will back because I want what I want. And God's like, that's not what I want for you,
Oh man, I so relate to that. Yeah,
Oh
like
man.
it gets confusing for me sometimes because and on one hand, they say to follow your heart, but it's easy to get confused. Like like we were talking about service. It's important to do service, but it's we're a class of people who go to extremes over everything. So it's easy to get carried away. And sometimes, you want what you want. You're following your heart. Do you know, I've had to say this prayer so many times where I'm like, God, if this is not your will for me, you have to fucking take this from me
Right.
because I can't let it go. I
Yeah.
cannot let it go. And I've seen this, whether it's a man or money or business, or it's like my claws are so dug in
Mhm.
that I don't have the power to let go.
Yeah. I think
And
that's an
that's,
everyday battle for us. Maybe not every
yeah,
day, but it's a battle, I mean, it
it's a
says it
frequent
in,
visitor. That's for damn sure.
yeah, it is, it's in, and I say this again, not to promote my spirituality or anybody else, but for me, I'm a Christian. So I read the Bible, right? And whether you believe in it or not, you can get some good nuggets from it. It's up to you to choose. But in there, it talks about a guy talking about the spiritual battle he faces every day. And he talks about that I do what I don't want to do, but what I want to do, I don't do it. And he doesn't understand this. And the answer that God had given him was, this is the battle that you're in every day. It's spiritual warfare. And that's why I
Spiritual
ask you to put
warfare.
the armor of God on you. So that's why I'm always trying, when I pray and I'm talking to God, or if I'm reading my book, or even just talking to you right now about God, it's putting on my spiritual warfare. It's putting on my armor to battle that warfare. Now, if
Mhm.
Joseph wakes up in the morning, grabs his cup of coffee, watches Sports Center, goes about his day, works, then goes to the gym, then plays basketball, comes home. I mean, I've got no armor up against that warfare. And I always say this, as we're talking, the enemy's out there doing push-ups. He's not just sitting back waiting and like, oh, Joseph's a good guy now and he's sober, I'm going to leave. No, he's doing push-ups. I got to put my armor on every day, but I'll
Mhm.
forget, I'll forget. And it's what we do. And it's human. And that's why I love God's grace.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I do feel the difference when I don't do my morning routine as well.
Oh yeah.
Try to connect into source, read, meditate, all that stuff. The
That's right.
days that I don't do it, totally feel it by the end of the day.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. You
Like,
would think
like the,
we would like not forget when we had that feeling, right?
I'm
But
telling
like
you, it's the default. It's like I love
the
me some, I
default.
love, yeah, it's your default mode network. I love science because it's kind of impersonal. It made me feel like it, you know what it did? It removed the shame for me. It was like, oh, this is the addicted mind. This is, scientifically how addiction works. And this is how it plays out. This is how trauma feeds into it. Made it like impersonal, like, oh, it's not my fault.
Yeah, yeah. And
It
I
is
think
my
in recovery we can.
responsibility.
You just said the addicted mind. Is that the podcast, the addicted mind? Or is that?
Oh, I did. Yeah, I know
I
Dwayne
was,
Louder. He's
I was,
amazing.
yeah, I was
That's a
just
good
thinking about that.
podcast. Yeah, no, yeah, Dwayne Dwayne, what's his last name? Osterfeld.
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, he's
I was just
a
thinking about that.
The Addicted Mind. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's
And
got a
it's,
great podcast.
I think in recovery, you know, we come in and there's so much, right? There's so much that you feel like I got to go to meetings and I got to do this. And I think for me, I got so wrapped up in all the things that I have to do, you know, right? And it's more of like I said, I'm so like, okay, why are we doing them? Right? Like I said, helping others, going to meetings, like, you know, I can go to 90 meetings in 90 days and just say, hey, I did it. But it's not just doing the things, but it's understanding why is the meeting important? Well, what does the meeting do
Motives.
for you? Right. It's the motives, understanding what you're doing behind the action, you know, and
Mhm.
sometimes if you don't, you just do the action anyway, and that's okay.
Yeah,
And that's why I say about like helping people is like, you know, if you can sponsor one guy, great. If you can sponsor 5, it doesn't matter. The reality of helping people is to turn your thoughts to other people and freely give somebody else what's freely given to you. Well,
yeah,
I can give hope right now to people as we're talking to them. You know, you can do that in ways and do it. I love doing the rooms because I can relate to people there.
right.
But we get so stuck with only just doing that we forget, like, are we doing that in our homes? You know, are we doing that in our marriage? You know what I
Right.
mean? And I always say this, I want to be, if I'm a 7-figure man, I don't want to be a $10 husband. I want to be a 7-figure husband. I want to be a 7-figure father. What good is it to be a 7-figure man, but a 10-cent husband and a $10 father, you know?
Right.
And those are things that I've learned after, you know, the couple of years that all I cared about was just staying sober. And today I'm like, okay, how do I use my recovery and the journey to be a
Mhm.
better father, to be a better business owner, to be a better husband, you know,
Right.
and that puts me in that motive to keep moving forward. There's goes that word again, motive.
Yeah, motive. Yeah, keep it moving. I love that. You're sort of speaking to, doing versus being too,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
That self-awareness, self-examination. Let's back up a little bit to, you mentioned, some, trauma that you experienced, some, experiences in prison. Could you sort of share a little bit about, I'm just always so curious. I always, not always, but a lot of the time, most of the time, addiction, there's some kind of trauma underneath. And so, can you just talk a little bit about how you got to the point where you were, addicted and going to prison, just sort of like a brief overview of your story?
Yeah. Yeah. I think we all have trauma. Like when you just said the word trauma, and it's not just addicts. Like I think we had things we didn't deal with. And, you know, drugs and alcohol were never my problem. They were just the solution to my problem.
Yeah.
So when I think about the trauma, I think how we all do have them. We're just going to a different mechanism. If you're not going to drugs and alcohol, you might be going to something else to solve that problem. And that's what I did. I was, you know, I came from Michigan, and that's where I was born and raised, in Detroit, Michigan, which is up north, and I moved down south to Florida where I live now. And I was 14 years old. Now up north, I was an athlete. I played varsity basketball. You know, I was, whether you want to call it the popular kid, but to keep myself humble, I was well known. Okay. And I just knew a lot of people. I played sports. I was so used to being around people. You know, that's the purpose of me just saying that, is because I had so many people in my life. Friday nights were like, come to my house. We'll talk about where we're going to go, and we'll go somewhere, you know. And I would drink at the time, but I never thought it was like really a problem. I was just thought like, I'm just having fun with all my friends. Um, but I realized I was also using that to escape of the same things that I was afraid of, you know. And one of the things I was always afraid of was not being good enough, like especially in sports. Like I wanted to be the best athlete out there. So I was afraid of not being good enough. And my parents realized I was drinking over the weekends, and out of nowhere, I found out we're moving to Florida. We know nobody in Florida, you know, it's totally different. I had one aunt here, but that was it. You know, I have a huge family in Michigan, a bunch of friends I grew up with. So I'm, you know, going from being known and having a bunch of friends to literally not knowing anybody. And that was a very tough moment for me. I went through a very big, like I look back at it and I was depressed. I really like remember just thinking one night, like, I'm just going to probably hitchhike and maybe make it back to Michigan. Like that's where my mind was, like, I need to get out of here because I know nobody here. And then, you know, we start high school and all I care about is basketball. And there was all these issues with me playing basketball because, you know, I went to high school where Tim Tebow played, you know, football, and I didn't live in the same county. And so something happened with Tim Tebow. Long story short, he wasn't living in the county of the school he was going to. So they ran a big investigation. I didn't live in the county. I just wanted to go to that school anyways because it had a good basketball team. And so I had to get moved from there to a new school. And then I moved in the middle of the season, so I couldn't play there. And only reason I went to school and stayed out of trouble was because of basketball. Like that was my drug. You know, I would smoke pot and I would do stuff, but if it got in the way of basketball, I always felt like I would kind of make sure basketball was first. And then I just started I started not even caring about anything else anymore. And then when I realized in ninth grade that I couldn't play basketball that year, I just didn't go to school. My dad didn't know for 6 months I wasn't going to school. And I would work at this pizza place. And at this pizza place, I would stay there all day long because I had such a resentment towards my dad. I didn't even want to be home when he was home. So instead of going to school, I'm going to this pizza place. And for 6 months, my dad has no idea, because back then they would call your house, you know, and tell you you're not there. And I would delete the voicemail. And then, you know, finally my dad found out and I said, yeah, I'm not going back to school and you're not going to make me, and I don't care. I'm dropping out. And, you know, it is what it is. And I moved out. At, you know, I ended up being 15 years old. I found a guy that worked with me at the pizza place that was like 19. We got an apartment together. And then all I was doing at the time, and I say all I was doing because I didn't think it was a big deal. I would smoke pot and I would drink, right? And that was what I thought was normal, right? I'm smoking pot, I'm drinking, it's no big deal. But I couldn't go a day without it. Like I couldn't even work without it. And then I got introduced to opiates. He would work all day and I'm like, how are you working all day? And when he gave me an opiate and I took it, I told him, I said, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. And I'm going to promise you, Arlene, I tried. I did that. I mean, and then it got to a place where I didn't have money. I ran out of money because they're expensive. And, you know, back in those times, and I say back in the times, which was like 10 to 12 years ago, I'm almost 15 now. It was a big pain epidemic here in Florida. There were so many doctors here.
Yeah.
If you've ever watched like the documentaries, it's very real. Like I've watched them. I'm like, that's really what happened. You could go anywhere and it was almost like they were giving them away.
Yeah.
So it was so easy to get. And I would take more and more. It turned from $100 habit to a $200 to a $300. And then when you can't afford it, you become sick. And that was the worst. Even today, when I get sick, it reminds me of the dope sick from drugs. And I would steal. My first thought would be like, okay, I just need to get money. I take money out of the register. I take money from a roommate. You know, I didn't care. You know, I still was on that mentality of anger. I had so much anger. It was me against the world. And if you got in my way, it was your fault. You know, if you left your purse somewhere and I took your money, it's your fault that I stole it because you shouldn't have left your purse around me. And that was my heart. I would steal from my mom, my dad. You know, my uncle would come visit and he'd only bring cash because my uncle wouldn't use credit cards. I'd take all of his cash and he'd be left with nothing and have to go. I mean, I can tell you stories of people that I hurt. And then the first time at the age of 18, I robbed somebody. And I ended up getting caught with it. He called the police, told on me. And then I was planning to rob somebody again. And the police came and set me up. I went to prison that time at 18 for 2 years. Nothing changed though for me. I just said, I'm going to calm down a little bit more when I get home. And I picked right back up. And again, the story of just continuous, same old. And then same thing, I got in trouble for another robbery. And then at that time I did 3 years, you know, and I don't like to talk too much about, you know, cause it's more really, I want to talk about more of the hope, but I wanted to make sure I kind of related to, you know, how it got and how it was for me. You know, somebody wanted to commit suicide and, you know, and I was molested. You know, I skipped over the part being molested from 5 to 7 years old. And I always thought that wasn't important in my life because I felt like it didn't really affect me. But what that taught me was when it happened, nobody really talked to me about it. You know, I come from a Middle Eastern culture. And the person I'm getting in trouble, but like, I didn't go to like, my parents didn't probably believe in therapy. They were probably just like, okay, he's fine. He's good. And no one discussed nothing with me. So for the first time in my life, that introduced me to when something happens to you, you don't talk about it.
Oh man.
And that was tough when coming into rooms of recovery, because guess what? We want to talk about everything. So those are some of the things that taught me to, when something happens in your life, you don't talk about it. And really just the damage that was created until finally I got to that 10 by 10 cell and said, my life has to be different. You know, my story's not going to end with a period here. It's just a comma.
Yeah. It sounds like you saw yourself in that man, like you saw your future.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Like I just saw, like, if I don't make a change, and I say this today, I don't have a relapse prevention, you know, like I don't have a plan. I don't have You know, I have so much respect for somebody who relapses and comes back and say, oh yeah, I'm picking up my white chip again. Cause I know me, I don't do that. If I relapse and I go back to drugs and alcohol, I'm gone. I'm not
Yeah.
coming back. I'm going to either die or end up in prison. And I'm okay with thinking, like some people would say like, well, you need to be prepared. And I'm not prepared. That helps me stay sober. It's life or
Right.
death. You know,
Yeah.
there is no middle of the road solution for me. If I relapse, I'm going to be like that guy or I'm going to be dead.
Yeah. No, that's a mentality that works for a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
Because
Mhm.
listen, you and I have seen lots of people die. They say if you stay sober long enough, you go to a lot of funerals, and that has absolutely been my experience. And I know that from what you shared today, that you've experienced it too. So it's no joke.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not. Mhm.
No. Thank you so much for being so honest about what happened.
Of
Those
course.
early childhood experiences are so formative, and we don't really understand, how it affects us. It's not talked about a lot. And so people don't, parents, they don't understand that their kids need help after that to sort of integrate the information and the experiences and make peace. A lot of times the child experiences that they're guilty or they're bad or they're wrong. Children tend to take on responsibility that's not theirs, especially in abuse cases. So it's
Yeah.
important that we learn to get help. So okay, so to pick the story back up from the place where you got sober January 24th 2017, is that right?
That's right.
So you get out, and how can you walk me through like what early recovery looked like for you? It sounds like
Yeah.
you did the 12 steps and got a sponsor and did the whole thing. What
Yeah.
was that
So
like?
Yeah. So as soon as I got out of prison, I had, obviously in prison, I didn't get high the last 3 months. There was no really recovery there. I just didn't get high. And when I got home, there was actually an individual, between that story, between the, first using drugs and January 24th, I had several stints of like going to treatment or trying, and really I was only doing it to like avoid a jail time.
Right.
But I met some people that were in recovery. And I remember the one thing that I remember is like the guys that were really in it, I used to think it was fake, but I would like see something in them. Like these guys seem like they're having fun. Are they high? Like, are they, I don't understand. But the reason why I say that is because that's the reason why I reached out to somebody. Is I remember the fellowship. Like I remember these guys would just have fun together and they're going to like the beach and the movies. And I'm just like, I never got involved because I wasn't really there to stay sober. So when I came home, there was one guy that I remembered his name, and I was like, let me search him up on Facebook. And I searched him up on Facebook, and he brought me to a men's meeting. It's the same meeting that I go to today. And it's so important for me that I went to this men's meeting because, like I just shared, it's so hard for me to open up, especially as a man. I used to think that's what men do. We don't open up. But I go to this meeting, and there's between 70 to 80 men here. And there's, men with 30 years, 2 years, big men, little men, all different kinds of guys opening up, sharing. And for the first time, I thought this could be me. I could be okay with being honest. Like, if this is this what it takes? Like, I was still like, I call it young. I didn't know what this whole recovery thing was. So I'm like still searching, like, okay, so we just got to come in here and like tell people how we feel. Okay, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do. And then they asked at the end of the meeting, does anybody here not have a sponsor? And it's funny because in my mind, I said, I don't want to raise my hand, but like you can call it God or anything. For some reason, I just raised my hand. And I met the first guy that came to me, and he sat with me, and he had so much passion. You think I have passion. Sometimes I say like it's his spirit in me.
Mhm.
Um, and he was sober for like 7 years. I don't know where he is today. He might have relapsed. We don't know, but, and what I remember, he just talked to me. He said, listen, do you want to stay sober? I said, yeah. He said, why? I said, cause dude, if I don't, I'm going to die or end up in prison. And he said, are you scared? I said, I'm not going to lie. Like, I'm really scared. He said, good, then let's get to work. And I remember when he said that, it was like you were talking about being okay with our feelings. I feel like that's the first time I was like, okay, so it's okay to be scared. It's like he just said, good, like I thought he was going to be like, you shouldn't be scared. You should be a man. And I remember he just told me, if you do the things that I suggest you to do and you're honest with me, and you're always 100% honest. And that was the one thing he kept pushing to me was, I just need you to be honest. This ain't school. This isn't homework. This isn't like, I'm not a therapist. I'm going to be your brother, and you're going to be honest with me about what you're feeling. Have you ever done that with anybody before? And I said, never in my life. He said, have you ever stayed sober? I said, never in my life. He said, good, we're going to make changes now. And I remember him saying these things to me that made sense, And that's what we started doing. We right away got into the steps. You know, that Sunday morning meeting was at 9 o'clock in the morning, and we would meet at 8 o'clock right before the meeting. And they would serve, you know, breakfast there. And it was at like a treatment center, a halfway house. And we would just go through the steps. And, you know, I didn't have a problem with 1 and 3. You know, I knew I had a problem. I believed in a higher power, and I was okay to turn my will over to him. And even 4, I was like, I was a little bit nervous about it, but I remember I said, you know, I was walking in looking for the reasons why this works. And I was like, well, this is part of the stuff he was talking about, being honest. But the one thing I didn't put on there was that I was molested when I was 5. And he looked at me before I started doing my 5th step and reading it to him. And he asked me, he said, if there's anything you're leaving off of here, it's going to be the one reason you get high. I'm just going to promise you that right now. And it might not be tomorrow when you leave. I don't even know if it's going to be next week or next year, but I will guarantee you 100% confident that if you left something off here you don't want to talk about, one day you will get high again if you don't talk about it. Is there anything here? And then I opened my mouth and I said yes. And I shared with him that. And that was the first time that I was open with it. And we talked about it. We talked about the fears I've had from it. And by God's, you know, divine appointment, he was molested when he was younger. So he shared with me how he got over that. And what was amazing, what he said to me was, you know, I actually know the guy today, and I made amends to him. I said, what are you talking about? You made amends to him. You don't owe him nothing. He said, I've been wishing death upon that man for so long. And I remember him telling me that, you know, I always wondered if he had any pain from it. And I just wanted to make sure he didn't. And I thought that was neat. And the amazing part is I actually sat down in front of the individual and I shared with him that, hey, I just want you to know I forgive you. And it's the greatest moment in my whole entire life, because that person got emotional with me. They were molested when they were a child. They've went through a lot of therapy because of all this stuff, you know, and people hear that. And, you know, even me, I hear child molester, I'm like, lock them up. You know, that's the first thought. And I'm still with that. Right. But what was amazing for me was I was freed. You know, and it taught me that a lot of times when I'm angry at somebody, it's like they say in the book, is I'm drinking the poison, I'm wishing that person dies. So it freed me. And he started sharing with me this stuff. And my first year of sobriety was, you know, some people talk about it was tough. My first year of sobriety was amazing. You know, we went to like they call it the young people's group. I don't know if they have that in California, they have YPG. And we had this event, you know, and I was lucky enough that this year I was 3 months sober. And this year in St. Augustine, Florida, where I live, we were hosting the event for Florida. And we go to a hotel at the World Golf Village. It's a Hall of Fame place. And there's over 1,500 people. And if somebody came there, they probably thought this was a rave or something. And we just had a blast, you know, and that was the first time that I was like, this is dope. You know, people are having fun in sobriety. Yeah. We're going to these meetings and these speaker meetings. We're doing a whirlpool at the pool and we're just having a blast and we're sober. I didn't think I could have fun being sober. Yeah. So when I got to have fun being sober, it changed my life. I think that was like something that I said, I could do this forever, because I know in the first 3 months, I was like, I'm just going to do this for today and like the one day at a time. But I always wondered, like, what if I go to a football game, you know, or what if I go to like my family's weddings where I guarantee you I'd be the only one not drinking and those were the thoughts. Yeah. And I always said, like, I'm a terrible dancer. I'll never dance if I don't drink. You know, I'll never do this if I don't drink. And so that was something that really, I felt like kind of removed that stuff. I said, I can have fun in sobriety. I can be me and be okay. You know, so my first year was amazing. You know, it was the second and third year where I got comfortable a little bit and I stopped doing like what we talked about. COVID happened and it gave me excuses to not go to meetings. And I just started feeling the irritability and discontent. So, you know, but then I got right back into it. You know, I got right back and I said, I can't, like, I remember I went to my first meeting, like physical meeting, and I was like, oh my gosh, I miss this so much. You know, so the first year was really like, you know, I look back at it and it was amazing because I got to learn who Joseph is. You know, I got to learn about myself. I figured out who I was. I started to actually get comfortable, like calling my sponsor, being like, hey, I don't know why today's my first day off. And a thought just came to my head, like, go smoke weed and go watch a movie. Like, that kind of scares me. Why did that happen? He's like, well, because the disease centers in your mind. You know, I started to learn that it's okay to just call somebody and just be honest. So that's kind of how I went into the first year. I think a lot of it was catapulted by my fear of knowing that if it was like what I said all the time, like I was so scared to go back to prison or like have to go through that again. I was so grateful for just being free and like being home, you know, and not chasing a drug. that I was like, I don't ever want to do that again. So I did whatever it took. I was honest and open.
Yeah, that gift of desperation,
Yeah.
willingness to do anything to stay sober. I love that. Sometimes that's what's required.
Yeah. For me, it was. I had to go through a
Yeah.
lot, but God brought me to that place.
Such a powerful story. I love it. I want to talk a little bit about the work that you do now. You do a ton of service work. We were talking about how you are, you're uniquely qualified to help people that are in prison, right? Because of your experiences, you're on the other side. You can have that empathy and compassion, like you legit know what it feels like,
Oh, yeah.
it's not just hyperbole in your case. And I think that makes you uniquely qualified to help others. So you mentioned doing the Jacksonville Youth Academy. We're talking about helping people who are making that transition. Tell me a little bit more about how you're working with those people.
Yeah. So I just got approved to go into the Florida prisons. It's been something I've been really trying to do for a long time. And because when I got out of prison, I was on probation for 2 years. So you have to wait. There's a period you have to wait for, so you have to be, at first it was at 2 years, but they just switched it to one, but not by the time I was, after you got off probation. So when you're on probation, you still belong to the state. So I've been waiting to go back into prisons. And really, like, I fell in love with actually the youth as well. We were talking before we started the recording. I have three, I call them my children, but they're stepchildren. So there's a 19, a 17, and an 8-year-old. Well, the 19 and 18-year-old, I was in their life when they were like 15 and 13. And, watching how they were when they were young and thinking about when I was that age and I feel like it's such a monumental age. They make so many mistakes, and how do we deal with those mistakes, and how are they dealing with it? And I think a lot of youth today don't have those conversations. There's not a lot of people. And especially like in the detention center that I'm going to, these kids don't have parents. They don't have, good role models. So like, it's really been on my heart to go and talk with them. Because I think I could relate to them, being at that age of 14 and just kind of wanting to be a rebel, but not realizing like, where am I going, and thinking that I'm not good enough. So I'm going to go in there and do some mentorship with the kids. These kids have been getting in trouble, and I think some of them just need some hope. Some of them need somebody to tell them that I love you, I believe in you, you're great. As simple as that may sound, those kids need to hear it. We all need to hear it. Like, I need to hear it, but so I'm going to be going in there with those kids, and then also going into the prisons. You got guys who are coming home, and in prison, there's not a lot of positivity. I had the first thing that somebody told me when I got out was, she was like, 85% of you come back, so I'll see you again. And that's the stuff that they're telling you. And it's tough, because I think sometimes, you start to believe it. Like, I know I believed it a little bit, but I knew, like, there was also a part of me that's like, that means 15% don't come back. So how do I be part of that 15%?
Right.
Now, not a lot of people think that. A lot of people think, in there, I have a felony, because they're telling you this. It's going to be hard for you to get a job. It's going to be hard for you to buy a house. There's all these things that they tell you that you can't do. Well, I'm going to go in there and tell them all the things that they can. And I'm a living example. I'm not a genius. I dropped out in 9th grade, but I had a willingness to want to be part of that 15%. So how do we get that 15 to 20? How do we get that 20 to 25? And I want to show these guys how to do it, because it's possible, and there's a lot of areas. And I think what happens, not just with people in prison, this will help anybody, is they get stuck. They feel like they fit in this box, that they're different from everybody, that they're not going to be able to do this, they're not going to be able to do that. And if once you realize, like, you're not different than this box, everybody has their own box, but it doesn't matter. Just take yourself out of the box and show people why you're different. And you can make it. It is possible. Here's a list of people that hire felons. I remember sharing that with a guy the other day, and I said, here's a list of people that hire felons. And the guy literally looked at me and said, you're telling me people hire felons? I said, yeah, they do. He said, I always thought people don't hire any felons. I always thought I had to go, like, maybe sell some stuff on the streets. And I said, no, he literally believed that people don't hire felons. And I realized, like, man, a lot of these guys believe that there's no way out, that this is just their story. I've been to prison 2 or 3 times. It's my story. So I'm going to go in there just to share some hope and give these guys direction. And that's my new drug now. I believe if you want to help people, the best way to help people, and this is what I heard that helped me, is to help people with what you overcome. Like, whatever I overcame, it's what I should be using to help other people, because it's real. I'm not going to try to help somebody cook dinner because I can only make a steak about, that's it. but I'm going to go in there and help guys how to get out of prison and live free. I'm going to go in there and help the youth how to understand that they're loved, they're understood, and that if they need somebody to be there, I'm going to be there with them every week. And I believe that's how authentically I can actually help change the world one person at a time.
Yeah, there's this saying that empathy is the antidote to shame, right?
Yeah.
And you're showing up with so much empathy, and your example is so sorely needed in these environments. And man, what a just such an inspiring story today. I'm so grateful that we had an opportunity to talk, and I can't wait to come on your podcast. You're
I'm
doing a
excited.
podcast. I was like, why is this guy working so hard? It's like you have a family with all these kids, and you're doing the podcast, you're doing service work, and you're doing all this stuff, and then you run this very successful business. It's like, what an amazing example you are of somebody that is, spirit led, and that can show people that it's possible to overcome all this. I'm so glad that we had some time together today.
Oh, of course. It was great. I enjoyed it. I'm excited to have you on next week. That's going to be really good. That's
so
going to be
sweet.
good.
Yeah, we'll be. I've been sober a long time, so I got some things to say.
Let's do it. I won't talk as much as I did today. I promise.
You won't be able to.
Right. There you go.
We'll change scenes. Well, Joseph, thank you so much for spending time with me. If people want to reach out to you and just connect, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Yeah, the best way is on my social media platforms, like on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. I always tell people, like, I'm on TikTok too. When you get out there, I mean, more people have been doing this now. They've been sharing my story.
Yeah.
Like, yes, you can follow me and like stuff. That's great. But like, I do want to connect with you. I do. If you heard something that you think, hey, maybe you've been to prison before, or maybe you're in addiction right now and you're just looking for some, I've been talking to some people who are just looking for another person to call when they're going through their day. And what I tell people all the time is, like, I believe this is my gift. I believe God's put me here for this. So utilize it. And that's what I want people to do, is connect with me on Instagram and social media, and let's chat. Let's build a community and help each other.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that. Well, I'm going to leave links to all your socials in the show notes at odatchat.com. But do you want to just shout out your Instagram in case
everything is Joseph, which is Joseph, and then the last name Kajy. So if you just type in my name, Joseph Kajy, which is Kajy, you can find me on everything.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I look forward to talking to you next week.
Absolutely. Me too. Thank you for just creating this platform, allowing me to share today.
It's beautiful. Thanks so much.
Thanks.